We come to you with the information that doctors are talking about in doctors' lounges all across the country. We try to arm you with the information that you need so that you can advocate for yourself and for your family and their health care. And we try to demystify the the um, the information that you're getting from sources that are trying to influence you one way and try to give you the whole story. The show is brought to you by the Docs for Patient Care Foundation, which is the only physician-led healthcare think tank in the country. The Docs for Patient Care Foundation stands for healthcare freedom for all Americans, as well as we're having some sound issues here, guys. Docs for Patient Care Foundation also stands for the doctor-patient relationship. Our website is www.d4, that's number 4, pcfoundation.org, d4pcfoundation.org. Please go to our website and follow the things that we're writing about and talking about. We need your support, so please go there and generously add to our efforts and help us continue bringing you this show and do all the work that we do in Washington and all around the country. Well, we are within 30 days of an election, and as predicted, and as has been the case in every election since 2008, healthcare is front and center. It's being talked about because of COVID every day. The COVID issues dominate the news cycle, and that's all about healthcare. We are talking about the Supreme Court nominee, Amy Coney Barrett, and the left is trying to portray her as the slayer of Obamacare, and why we need to not allow her to get on the bench, because the Obamacare case is going to be heard by the Supreme Court in November for the third time, and this is something that the left is trying to convince the American public is on the ballot, and that she is certainly going to overturn it, which nobody can say for sure. So there's health care everywhere that you turn, as is the case. And we're going to talk about some of the good things about health care that came out of the Trump administration with a gentleman who I've known for quite some time, who has worked in health care in various places and has been doing this for quite some time. Brian Blase is a senior policy fellow at the Galen Institute, but I knew Brian when he was at the Mercatus Institute, which has done incredible work in healthcare. And from 2017 to 2019, he was a special assistant to President Trump for economic policy at the White House's National Economic Council. At the Galen Institute, he's been writing considerably about some of the plans that have been put together by a consortium of individuals who have been working on healthcare for a number of years, but for the last 2 years trying to put together a comprehensive policy. And Brian has written extensively about that and the things that came out of the Trump administration when he was serving. So, Brian, welcome into the Doctor's Lounge.
Hey, Dr. Hal, it's great to be with you. Really respect Docs for Patient Care and the work that they do.
Well, thank you for saying that. You know, we're all in this fight together, Brian, and we all want the same thing, which is a healthcare system that works for patients and not for special interests.
Yep.
So, Brian, you know, I want to get you to share with the audience the good things that came out of the Trump administration regarding health care. Everybody in the mainstream media, the dishonest mainstream media, is portraying Trump as the worst president with regard to health care. And I, every week on this show, maintain that, in my opinion, I think he is one of the best presidents as far as health care is concerned and what he has done for the American public. So can you unpack that?
Sure. And I think one of your opening comments is healthcare is a big electoral issue, and that's certainly the case. And I think part of that reason is because the government has gotten so involved with healthcare. It would be great for healthcare to be less politicized, and for that to happen, we need to reduce government's role and more empower patients working with their providers, working with their doctors, and get government and bureaucracy out of the way. When the president was elected in 2017, the big challenge was the problems with Obamacare. The individual market, which is the place where self-employed and individuals in the middle class that don't have coverage through the workplace go to purchase their insurance, was in a state of chaos. Premiums had doubled from just 4 years earlier, before Obamacare's rules were in place. Deductibles were soaring, and choices were dwindling. You only had a choice of sort of the government-approved plan, and the number of insurers offering those plans declined markedly. So the president stepped into a challenging situation and really took a lot of steps to stabilize those markets and open up options for people who that coverage wasn't well serving and who needed alternatives. So the administration in the first sort of after, initially there was a congressional effort to deal with the problems. Unfortunately, that didn't work out the way we hoped, but the president took strong action. He opened up things called association health plans, which allow small businesses to join together and get some of the regulatory advantages and economies of scale that large businesses get. He opened up short-term renewable plans that aren't subject to all of the Obamacare regulations and are much more affordable and flexible for individuals. And the administration, the president signed a repeal of the individual mandate tax penalty. This was the penalty that people faced if they couldn't afford health insurance that Obamacare had made more expensive. So those three actions, the expansion of association health plans, the expansion of short-term renewable plans, and the elimination of the individual mandate penalty, significantly increased workers' and families' ability to obtain coverage that were harmed by Obamacare. The White House Council of Economic Advisors issued a report sort of doing a cost-benefit analysis and showed that over a decade, the net economic benefit from those three actions is $500 billion. Wow. The administration also took steps to improve the individual market. So it allowed states to access money through these state 1332 waivers to set up some programs to subsidize high-cost enrollees in the individual market. Those reduced premiums. It also, Hal, and this is a change that I think is the most profound and which I have written a lot about, and it's hard for the mainstream media to really wrap their heads around it. He put employer-sponsored insurance on a potentially radically improved trajectory.
Right.
So right now, most people get their coverage through their employer.
And
there's some
the
advantages
employers
to that
like giving it. They like giving the insurance to people.
That's right. There's some advantages to that. One of the disadvantages is that the employer picks the plan. So the workers, particularly at small and mid-sized firms, may only have the choice of a single insurance plan, which is not chosen by them, but it's chosen by their employer. Now, one of the reasons that employers provide this coverage is because there's a big tax advantage. The value of the premiums isn't subject to federal income or payroll taxes. So the administration didn't do anything to sort of disrupt that arrangement. But what it did is offer a new option. So instead of the employer picking the plan for their workers, they can set aside an amount in what's called a health reimbursement arrangement, and workers can take that amount and purchase coverage in the individual market that works best for them. This helps some employers that don't want to be involved in the health insurance business. It also holds the promise of workers having more choice and control over their insurance coverage. Now, this reform is going to be gradual. It's going to take a while, sort of, for it to take effect. But there's a really, it's expected that it's going to increase the size of the individual market by about 8 million people by the middle of this decade. Now, as a contrast with Obamacare.
Wait, before you leave that topic, Brian,
yeah.
and you might be pointing this out, but this is very important because of the portability of insurance. You might want to comment on that.
Very good question. So one of the problems with employer-sponsored insurance is when people lose their job, either voluntarily or involuntarily, they lose their health insurance.
Like in COVID, like what's been happening now.
That's right. So so conservatives have long advocated for a defined contribution approach to health insurance, where the subsidy goes to the individual, and the individual picks the plan that works best for them, and that's the plan that they have regardless of where they work. Really, I mean, no other major expense that people have is tied to the place of their work, and employers, aren't selecting our car insurance, our homeowners insurance. It's sort of an artifact of some tax law from many decades ago, and some poor government policy during World War II, right, where employers really started offering employer-sponsored coverage.
So this one change really changes everything with regard to how people can choose what they want. The plan, there's more choice because they don't have to go into a one-size-fits-all insurance product, and they get to take it with them.
Yeah. So the portability this is not, in an ideal world, we would dramatically expand health savings accounts, because health savings accounts are controlled by the individual, right, and they carry with them across jobs. The HRA is it's an employer account, so right, the employer is making the key decisions on the HRA. Now, as a Trump administration, we worked within what the statutory authority was. There was very little that we could do administratively to expand health savings accounts, right, but HRAs, there was a lot of flexibility for us, and largely on HRAs, and this rule change, we reversed Obama administration restrictions. So the Obama administration restrictions, I'm not sure if your listeners remember the $100 per day penalty in Obamacare. It was actually on employers that would reimburse non-group individual market premiums like this. Mm-hmm. So they brought a hammer down on these types of arrangements, which I think was a foolish mistake on their part, but they did, and we reversed that and allow employers now to offer these HRAs that people can purchase individual market coverage with.
So the Trump administration has been very busy in trying to be innovative, creative, in trying to give people more control over their healthcare dollars and to protect them. Why don't you share with us many of the protections that the Trump administration has tried to implement to help people with different problems and to make sure that people are taken care of?
Sure. Let me just give you that one data point that contrasts Obamacare with the Trump administration's actions. So if you go back to when the Democrats were really pushing Obamacare more than a decade ago, they really talked about they were going to create a better individual market for health insurance, and it was a very attractive message. It turns out that the individual market housed only about 2 million people more than it was pre-Obamacare. CBO, our sort of neutral arbiter, expected the individual market would be about 18 million people more than it is today. So we've added about 2 million people to the individual market, and we're spending more than $50 billion on subsidies in the individual market now. So as a rough sort of measure, cost-benefit measure, we're spending about $25,000 per newly insured. And this is because Obamacare made coverage so much more expensive that the only people really who are buying it need massive government subsidies.
Right.
The Trump administration's HRA rule, I said, is projected to add 8 million people to the individual market with no new federal spending. So there's no new federal commitments. What there is leveraging employer contributions into the market, and it's actually going to create an improved, larger, more stable individual market over time. So counter to a lot of these narratives out there that the Trump administration has sabotaged Obamacare, it's really more truth that the Trump administration is fixing the core problems with Obamacare.
Okay.
Now, to sort of your question on sort of broader efforts, the administration didn't just focus on Obamacare and fixing problems with Obamacare and providing relief from Obamacare. Because really, Obamacare is the individuals in the individual market plus Medicaid expansion. And actually, one of the things I say about Obamacare now is that it really should be called, instead of the Affordable Care Act, the Medicaid Expansion Act, because nearly 100% of the people that have gained insurance through Obamacare, it's because they've been enrolled through the Medicaid program, and we could talk about problems with that if that's of interest. The administration wants to improve the healthcare system for all Americans, though, and has taken sort of profound actions to move in that direction. So one of the main actions taken by the administration over the past 12 months is on the area of price transparency. So for almost every other part of the economy, when people shop, they know what prices are in advance of receiving care. But there are a lot of entities in the healthcare system that benefit from not disclosing prices. So two of them are health insurance companies and big hospital systems. And the administration has taken actions to require that both hospitals and insurance companies disclose their prices. Actually, they finalized the hospital transparency rule almost a year ago now, and it's set to take effect in January of 2021. And what this information is going to do, it's going to, it'll help consumers, but it's also really going to help employers because a lot of these health insurance companies are not serving employers well.
Right.
And, there are, as you know, Hal, there's a lot of doctors out there that have innovative arrangements that disclose their prices in advance. And we want to get patients to those doctors and to those practices that are price transparent and, aren't going to surprise bill individuals. So the fact that price information is going to be available, I think is going to help really identify who those doctors and facilities are so that we can start getting more patients to providers that are, providing upfront price information to patients.
Right. So I'm going to throw out some key words that will kind of prompt you to talk about what else the Trump administration has done, because we can spend over an hour talking about all of the good things that came out of the Trump administration and destroy the narrative that the left and their media lackeys are trying to convey to the American public, which are all, really truly lies. So let me start with veterans, veteran health.
Yeah, I mean, this was a huge priority for the president. As you know, he's a big supporter of the military and veterans, and he came in, and the VA was in huge trouble.
A mess.
And they did something called Veterans Choice, so that they allow veterans. If the VA is serving veterans well, great. But if not, veterans can have better alternatives for them.
Absolutely. Telehealth.
Telehealth is really it's come to light, with the coronavirus pandemic, that there's a lot of care that people receive that they could receive in the comfort of their own home. And government instituted, and this is at a federal and state level, so many stupid restrictions that prevented the practice of telehealth. For instance, some states had regulations that the provider had to be licensed in the same state as the patient, or probably even a worse one, that the face-to-face visit had to occur before they could do a telehealth appointment, or that there were only limited number of locations that the patient would actually have to go to a particular site in order to access telehealth. It's really been clear with the pandemic that a lot of the services that doctors provide, and you can think about some specialties, for instance, mental and behavioral health, where a lot of it can be performed through Skype or video, that the Trump administration has been aggressive with both Medicare and Medicaid in reducing all of those stupid government barriers that never made much sense, that clearly were shown to be perverse by the pandemic, and which they want to make sure don't come back.
Right to try.
Right to try was legislation that the president signed in 2018 that allows patients who are extremely sick, who have sort of exhausted all of the options of sort of conventional treatment, to access treatments that haven't gotten full FDA approval yet, and is going to be hopefully a lifeline for many individuals who otherwise would have died without being able to get these medications and treatments when at an earlier time.
While we're talking about treatments, how about unpacking some of the actions that the president and the administration has taken to try to improve drug access and drug pricing? Brian, you there?
Sure. Yep. So this is a top priority for the president. One of the pieces of legislation that he signed was removing gag clauses. So these are if you go to the pharmacist, there were gag clauses that prevented the pharmacist from telling you about cheaper alternatives. If, say, you had a $20 copayment for a medication, but if you paid cash, the medication would only cost you $5. The pharmacist was prevented about telling you that you could pay cash and get the medication for $5. President signed legislation to get rid of the gag clauses. The administration, I'd say, has pursued two other. Let me mention the other thing that really in 2017 and 2018, the administration really prioritized, and this was some of the really good work of the FDA, approving generic medications. Really unprecedented number of generics coming onto the market. And there was actually, and this is an extremely underreported story, but drug price inflation overall has been much lower during the 3.5 years of the Trump administration than it was in the decades prior, and it's really from the introduction of a lot of this generic competition.
Right.
There was a 12-month period when actually year over year drug prices had declined. The president brought this up, I know, in his when he announced his health care plan 2 weeks ago. And then there's sort of two other broad areas where the president is focused. The first is he is very upset that Americans pay so much more for medications than individuals in other countries. So he's directed the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Alex Azar, to investigate different ideas for how Americans can pay less money, much less money than they do now for drugs, more on the order of what individuals in sort of other advanced economies across the world pay. And the second area is the president, there was a lot of work on, was these rebates. So there are drug rebates that are negotiated by PBMs, and it's sort of unclear how much the PBMs are maintaining of these drug rebates versus how much are actually passing through to the consumer.
I think it's very little. I think it's very little they're passing through.
So so that is a rule that the administration is was working on. It was pulled for sort of very complicated reasons, but I think it's something that the administration continues to sort of think through on how to bring more transparency to the very complicated sort of drug rebate pricing structure.
And the president has taken a keen interest in certain health conditions also, kidney care and diabetes, and ability of diabetics to get insulin. These are also initiatives.
So I'll start with the diabetes, and then I'll go to kidney care.
We've got 2 minutes before our hard break, but we can pick it up after the break if we need to.
Okay. The diabetes, the president. So this is one of the areas where the president was able to expand the use of health savings accounts. So to have a health savings account, you need to be enrolled in a high deductible health plan. And there are significant limitations to what a high deductible health plan can reimburse before the patient meets their deductible. And what we did was say, okay, for people that have chronic conditions, there may be sort of innovative plan designs that want to reimburse for insulin, for diabetics, for statins, for people with heart conditions. Prior to them meeting their deductible as a way to sort of incentivize adherence to the medications. And we want to allow HSAs to be integrated with these plans. So the administration now, for certain conditions like diabetes, like heart disease, plans can cover treatments for those conditions before the deductible, and people can still gain the benefits of contributing to an HSA while they maintain those plans.
So we're gonna go to a hard break, I think, right now, Brian. But we've spent a long time talking about all these great things that the Trump administration has done. I'm gonna just break right now, but we're gonna pick it up again and talk about the differences between what the Biden-Harris agenda is for health care versus not just what President Trump has done, but what he hopes to achieve in his next term. So please stay with us.
The docs. www.docs4patientcarefoundation.org. That's www.docs4patientcarefoundation.org. Go to our site and please make a generous tax-deductible donation and join the fight today. Thank you.
Medicare doesn't pay for it, and Blue Cross Blue Shield on Basalt, and it's $750.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mike Karuchak. Join me and my co-host, Dr. Hal Scherz, as we talk about the topics that doctors talk about amongst themselves, such as Medicare, Obamacare, alternative forms of care, and health information technology. Join us every Thursday morning, 8 to 9 a.m.
The Docs for Patient Care Foundation is your way to join the fight and become a member of an organization created by doctors for patients, dedicated to fighting for your healthcare freedom and preserving the doctor-patient relationship. Get a pen and paper. Write down docs4patientcarefoundation.org. That's DOCS, the number 4, patientcarefoundation.org. Go to our site and please make a generous tax-deductible donation and join the fight today. Thank you.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
We're back in the Doctor's Lounge. My guest today is Dr. Brian Blase, Senior Policy Fellow at the Galen Institute, the CEO of Blase Policy Strategies, and former Special Assistant to the President on his National Economic Council. And we have been talking about the accomplishments, many of which Brian was a part of when he was at the Trump White House, regarding the Trump healthcare policy. So, Brian, for the last 30 minutes, we've really just scratched the surface. There's more that we can talk about, but it seems to me that President Trump's accomplishments, his record on healthcare, is an incredibly positive record, and it in no way is consistent with what we're hearing from the left and from their surrogates in the media.
I agree with you. I always knew that the mainstream media and the health policy media had a bias towards the left, but it became very clear to me when they started calling me to sort of ask me my views and to explain things and to comment in stories that it's very much the case. I think it's a real problem, and conservative ideas are at a disadvantage. I mean, one thing, if you look at, there was actually some pretty good reporting on Obamacare through 2016, right? So if you go back and look at the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, there were stories about, Obamacare's plans having extremely high deductibles, people, calling them worthless because, many doctors wouldn't take those plans. Miraculously, though, Hal, all the problems with Obamacare disappeared on November 2016. And it's, consistently like that. I think that, the regulatory actions that we talked about, the steps on the health reimbursement arrangement and price transparency are two really profound policy changes that could significantly reform our healthcare system. And when you look at reviews from the mainstream media of the Trump administration's first term accomplishments and missed opportunities, they put it all together. They hardly ever mention those two, and it's enormously frustrating. And they spin it on, that the Trump administration was bent on sabotaging healthcare and taking away options, and nothing could be further from the truth. We were about expanding consumer options, thinking that, if the left thinks, we should restrict choices because the elites in government bureaucracies know better than individual families and patients what's best for us, and they try to restrict our options and steer us towards their preferred way of financing care and rationing care. And we think the patient should be in control. They should be empowered. that the resources should flow to them, and that they should have maximum choices in a competitive market. And, that side of the debate is unfortunately neglected, and I think it shapes American attitudes towards health policy.
And it's so important because, again, healthcare is one of the top 2 or 3 issues, as it has been for the past 12 years, and it impacts everybody's life, and very few people really understand what is they don't know what is going on behind the curtain, and so we hear all of these wonderful platitudes about what the left hopes to accomplish if they regain the White House, and I think that it would be a good exercise for the next 4 minutes that we have on the show to compare and contrast what the left is hoping to do with their Medicare for All plan versus what the Trump administration hopes to accomplish in a second term. And you and I are both signatories on the Health Policy Consensus Group report that goes through the things that we need to see happen in healthcare, and I think that we can expect to see happen for many of these points in a second Trump administration. So I'm going to turn the floor back over to you, Brian, and let you compare and contrast what the left wants to do versus what this what the consensus statement implies.
Hey, how happy to do that. Can I come back to your question on kidney care right before the break?
Oh,
I'd
certainly.
like to just talk about that.
You
for a
bet.
minute.
That's very important. As a kidney doctor, this is something that's very near and dear to my heart.
Well, then you should feel free to interrupt me or correct any
No. Go ahead.
that I make here. But I would say, kidney disease is horrific, and sort of the standard of care for decades. It's how Medicare reimburses is, people get dialysis in institutions, and dialysis is not a fun process for anybody to go through. So what the Trump administration did, and the president, signed an executive order on kidney care, and there are demonstrations being put out by the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services, and really there's 3 big aims. The first is to increase the number of kidney donations, so we can get people off of dialysis and get them to have their own kidney. And there were some sort of disincentives to people donating kidneys that the administration is looking to lessen those disincentives. The second is to move away from sort of institutional dialysis to dialysis that can occur in the home, ideally, when people are sleeping at nighttime. And the third is the development of an artificial kidney. So the administration is making progress on all 3 of those, and again, really taking on a significant problem in American healthcare. And I'd certainly welcome you to add anything to that you'd like.
Well, the Trump administration, I'm an observer, not a participant, but as a observer, one with strong opinions, I think that the Trump administration has done a fantastic job of listening to the people who are actually delivering the care, not the special interests. And so because of that commitment towards patients, he and his team have really tried to go around so much of the bureaucracy that has been more of the same, and break the glass and do something different to try to move us forward. And the things that you've said, Brian, about kidney care are spot on. And I think that there's so much more that we can expect to happen. In my lifetime, there's been so much work on tissue regeneration, and the Trump administration has been criticized for defunding research, for being anti-science, and that is just so absolutely ridiculous. And I just wish that we had a platform like we are having this morning so that we can really debunk so many of the myths and the misrepresentations about what has happened in healthcare with the Trump administration, which has a record that is, I think, exemplary and probably superior to most administrations, and what we can expect going forward. And so going forward, I think that what the left has in store for us is you don't have to really imagine what can happen if the left gets the White House, gets the Congress. You can see it around the world in other systems, and I know that Mercatus has written about this, and you've been involved in this, Brian, about socialized healthcare and what that means in England, where they do have choice to go outside of the national health system, but also in places like Canada, where choices have been limited, and these patients have been coming to America as a safety valve for their health care. And so let's kind of circle back to that and have you weigh in on that.
So, one of the funny things when I was working on Obamacare a decade ago, I would go on the radio and I usually get a question towards the end of the interview that was, because Obamacare was not going well, and it would be, didn't the Democrats just do this? They knew it was going to fail. They knew it was going to fail as a stepping stone to Medicare for all, with the government taking control of everything in our healthcare system. And, I always answered that question that I didn't think that's what they were doing, because they put a lot of resources and energy, and it was clearly a priority for the Obama administration to implement Obamacare and to have it work well. Fast forward, we're not that far from that period of time, and I think now that maybe I didn't give the right answer, because the Democrat primary debate was really an admission that Obamacare had failed. And on the one side, the people were pushing Medicare for all, which would have ended Obamacare, basically, and just had everybody enrolled in the Medicare program, versus those like Joe Biden, who said, yeah, it's not working well, but what we just need to do is expand subsidies. And take away more choices for people in the markets. So I think, the Medicare for all is certainly where the left wants to go with healthcare. And really, I worked in the administration for 2.5 years, and I see how the bureaucracy approaches issues with respect to Medicare. And it's very technocratic. It's also very politicized. So do we want the federal government setting payment rates throughout our economy and deciding what gets reimbursed and what doesn't? I think, that is a disaster. We cannot, price controls always have negative economic consequences. It's like one of the things that students in Economics 101 classes learn. But our healthcare system is largely driven by prices that are set by a bureaucracy at CMS. And, they try to do the best job that they can. They have very smart people. And we have great political appointees at CMS that are trying to do their best within sort of a really perverse construct. But what you have is you've got rates that are largely determined by the relative lobbying power of interest groups. And that's how, healthcare resources are allocated throughout the American economy. And Medicare's power is amplified because private insurers are often copying Medicare's decisions,
Right.
and they could be basing things on a multiple of Medicare rates.
Right.
I think we need to. So that is, I mean, that is though where the Democrats' North Star on health care is. They want universal coverage, and that continues to be their main priority. And from my perspective, people should all have health insurance. But I view the ideal sort of health financing arrangement very different from where the left wing of the Democrat Party is, where they want everyone in a government controlled plan where the government is setting the payment rates, collecting the premiums, and determining what is covered, what doctors and hospitals are reimbursed, where individuals have a real insurance protection, so they're protected in the event they have something catastrophic happen to them, some large medical expense, but that they fund sort of routine care with cash, like cash that we could have in a health savings account, where you actually have a market develop and you have providers that are forced to compete for consumer dollars and to meet consumer preferences, rather than sort of play all these games with third-party payment, with the role that insurance companies have in our healthcare system, where really you have pretty extreme administrative expenses to try to ration care. So I realize I just said a lot there. The vice president ran against Medicare for All in the primary, ran on a platform that involves expanding subsidies for Obamacare, and creates a public option. So the public option there, a public option is where the government collects the insurance premiums and sets what the rates are for the providers. And some people think a public option can save money if providers are paid what Medicare pays, because Medicare, Hal, as you know, tends to pay significantly less than what commercial payers pay. Some providers might balk at that because they don't want to take those low reimbursement rates. And then the question is, would the Democrats make participation in the traditional Medicare program, make a condition of participation in the traditional Medicare program, that providers accept the rates paid by the public option?
Would they tie that to licensure? That's what doctors are afraid of.
Yep.
And
so the public option is sort of a way for the left to sort of get the foothold in on sort of the path to Medicare for All. There's also significant problems with the Biden plan to increase subsidies for Obamacare. At a basic level, you're just using taxpayer dollars to paper over the fundamental problem with Obamacare, that the insurance is too expensive. Like I said at the beginning, most middle-class people aren't purchasing Obamacare plans because it's just not attractive coverage. The premiums are too high, the deductibles are too high, and the number of providers that take that coverage are too small. But the subsidies, so the subsidies are already very generous. The Biden plan would make them more generous, and a key to the Biden plan is that it would allow workers to choose whether to take employer coverage or to take a subsidy and buy coverage in the exchange. Now, at first glance, that may seem attractive. The worker would have a choice of where to go. The problem is that the subsidies are so generous for lower-income people, and the Biden plan would make them more generous, that you would get lower-income people better off financially for purchasing in the Obamacare exchanges. So there would be a loss of individuals from employer coverage to the Obamacare exchanges. Now, those individuals also tend to be the younger and healthier part of an employer. So what happens within an employer plan is that you get adverse selection when the healthiest individuals leave that plan, which means premiums in the employer plan would rise, which means employers are going to be more likely to drop coverage altogether. So the group Avalier Health did a study of the Biden plan, and they found that 18 million people would migrate to the exchanges voluntarily because they're getting a better deal. But another 14 million people would be forced out of their employer coverage because the employers just stopped dropping the coverage.
And
so that there'd be a loss of employer coverage of 32 million people.
which would collapse the private market.
Right. Right. It would be the sort of the precipice. And Chris Jacobs, who's a health policy expert, did an independent analysis and said that the fiscal cost of this would probably be in excess of $2 trillion because of the expanded subsidies and how many more people would be accessing these giant subsidies.
And then the Medicare for All, that's been estimated. I think the latest thing that I've read was approaching $4 trillion over 10 years.
$4 trillion a year. I believe. I think. The cost of Medicare for All. My former boss, actually, at the Mercatus Center, did an analysis of Medicare for All at being in excess of $30 trillion over a decade.
$4 trillion a year.
Yeah.
That's correct. That's right. So we're running short on time. I want you, if you would, Brian, one of the talking points on the left when healthcare comes up is pre-existing conditions. They love to throw that one out. Can you just comment on that for a moment before we leave this topic?
Yeah. So first of all, the first thing that the left does is exaggerate the extent of the problem. So when the vice president did this at the debate last week, where he said it was 100 million people that have pre-existing conditions, and the president correctly said it's not 100 million people that have pre-existing conditions. The best sort of number I can give you on the extent of the problem is from an Obamacare program. So when Obamacare took effect, it's created a high-risk pool, heavily subsidized high-risk pool, for people that couldn't get health insurance in the individual market. The total enrollment, the peak enrollment at any point in time in this high-risk pool was about, it was under 200,000 people. So first of all, it is not the scale of the problem, and the problem being people that have a medical condition that means they can't get an offer of affordable private insurance is much smaller than the left lets on. The second is we have, there were state programs to help people with pre-existing conditions before Obamacare. There were state high-risk pools, and they were subsidized, and people could go get coverage in state high-risk pools. The problem with state high-risk pools pre-Obamacare is that they weren't adequately funded. Well, conservatives recognize that problem and have plans to send significant resources to fully fund state-based high-risk pools. There's other types of programs, too. There's reinsurance programs. There's different ways to design it. But really, the conservative approach is one that believes in federalism, would let states set up their own programs, and would target individuals who have conditions that mean they can't get private insurance. In addition, what we really want is people to maintain a policy over time. So that's one of the things that the administration did with its short-term plans, is to make clear that they can be linked with other products that protect people from ever going through medical underwriting again, so that they are what we call guarantee renewable, so that once people have coverage, they are protected from any higher premium increase that they would face from getting sick in the future.
Just like auto and home owners insurance, they get to renew it. So we've got, I think, about 3 minutes, And Brian, we really aren't going to have a chance to go through the recommendations of the Health Policy Consensus Group, but I'd like to let all of our listeners know that everything that we have said about what the Trump administration has done and what is possible moving forward is summarized in the Health Care Choices 2020 proposal. So, can you tell people how they can get to that and why they should check it out with the last couple minutes?
Sure, and it's going to be, I think it's going to be fully released next week, I'm told, by Grace Marie Turner, who is the president of the Galen Institute. So you'd be able to, if you just Google Healthcare Choices Proposal and the Galen Institute or the Heritage Foundation, you'll find the full report. And really, it is when we're told that conservatives, Republicans don't have a health care plan, I always point them to two places. One, I point them to a 120-page report that the Trump administration released when I was there. It's titled Reforming America's Healthcare System Through Choice and Competition. It's got more than 50 detailed recommendations for what both the federal government and state governments can do to improve healthcare policy. And you know what? How most of what they can do to improve healthcare policy is
get out of the way,
ending or limiting, what they're already doing. And the Healthcare Choices proposal that has been worked on, by a broad coalition of medical professionals, business leaders, and policy experts, is what can we do to better to improve healthcare by really empowering consumers and patients, and also empowering medical providers, doctors, nurses, hospitals, to best provide that care, knowing that the way we get best results is through competitive markets, where consumers are shopping for what's giving them the most value.
Well, I hope that people who are listening to this share this podcast with their friends before they vote, because healthcare is clearly on the ballot this election, and the decisions that people make are going to have ramifications for their lifetime, their children's lifetime, and their grandchildren's lifetime. So, Brian, thank you so much for being with us today, and I hope that you'll come back and we can talk about some of the other things that you've so eloquently written about.
Hey, Hal, it's great to be with you. Thanks again for all you do, and for what all the doctors listening do. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Brian. And thanks for being with us in the Doctor's Lounge today. And come back next week when my co-host, Dr. Scott, will be back to talk more about healthcare and the election. Thanks for being with us.
The Docs for Patient Care Foundation is your way to organization created by
Brian, you still on?
for patients.
I'm here.
Hey, thanks so much for being on the show today.
You're welcome. It was fun. Good way to start the day.
I'm glad that you had a good time, and hope that you'll come on back. And listen, any time that you want to reach out to me, just do it. And I'm happy to participate in anything.